Okay, Arun, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
Well, listen, I want to jump right into your backstory because I think this is a really great way to set the stage for what we're going to get into in this conversation. So let's start off by hearing about your upbringing. You grew up in a really wildly diverse area outside of Los Angeles. So why don't you tell the listeners about what that was like growing up out there?
Yeah. I spent most of my childhood in a place called Cerritos, California, which not many people know about. If you are from Southern California, you may know about Cerritos because we had an auto mall, which was our claim to fame. And so Ernest, if you remember Ernest from the Ernest Goes to Camp movies, he was a spokesman for the mall. So that's how everyone in Southern California knew about Cerritos. That was our claim to fame. But it was like you say, it was extraordinarily diverse. I mean, it was you know like Koreatown plus um, you know uh, Little Manila plus we had lots of folks from Taiwan, Afghanistan, Mexico. I mean, if
Yeah.
you think about LA, it's just such a global spot, and that corner of LA just happened to be this incredible mosaic, if you
Mm.
will.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you told me, and in one of our previous conversations, you were mentioning to me that it it ended up feeling like a really formative time in retrospect because as you look back, you said that you had seen this idea of the American dream playing out with groups and families and individuals that weren't necessarily from America, and so with your ties back to India, it was kind of an interesting backstory growing up around all of that diversity, and yet at the same time seeing this American dream playing out with others and truthfully your own family. Is that right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I lived it. I was born here in the U.S., but my parents had immigrated here in the late '60s, early '70s, and you know, I guess you could say grew up with front row seats to the immigrant experience. I mean, I can't claim to be an immigrant myself, but like so many families here in America, we've experienced it, one way or another, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, for me, it was seeing my parents adjusting or trying to adjust to life here, and you know, I mean, the immigrant experience is such a powerful psychological experience, right? I mean, if you just can imagine that, and so there's so many levels to that, But I experienced it myself, just uh, from what I saw with my parents, and then just all around me. I mean, like you say, I think growing in a place like Cerritos, what you realize is, we're all from the same place in many ways. No matter what country you come from, that story is the same. And I saw it happening around me. My friends, really,
Mm.
my friends came from all over, and there's a lot there, which yes, it did absolutely impact me, and is a big part of what we're doing today. Really.
Yeah. And so as a teenager, you had the kind of the story that we all have of kind of our quirky first few jobs. One of your first jobs was working retail at an athlete's foot, and I'll be the first to say that I remember the athlete's foot stores. I
Wow. Good.
definitely would pop
Good.
into those
But
at
a
the
lot of
mall.
people don't. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't. But I'm glad someone does.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was kind of up there with like the Foot Locker
Yep.
vibe
Absolutely.
cruising the malls and stuff like that. But so you kind of you grew up in a really diverse area. You kind of had these jobs where you're in touch with different members of the community. Obviously, very diverse connection as you worked at Athlete's Foot. You went to college. You weren't really sure what you wanted to do, and you were kind of still trying to figure it out at that point. There came a time though, as you sort of transitioned into your first job, and I kind of like to call this the cutting teeth phase. But you were in the casino hotel industry, and a lot of people don't necessarily know what that is. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. But you told me that that really started to shift your perception of the real estate industry at large. So I want to kind of pause there and get a little bit more of that insight from you. Tell us about your experience there.
Sure. Well, for me, the path was accidental. Um, I think explored a lot of things when I was at college, but um, you know, I couldn't say, I had a strong sense of like one direction by any stretch. And I ended up graduating and I had one job offer, and so, the decision was easy. I ended up working for a company that was, our clients were the was a casino resort industry, primarily in Las Vegas. And, you know, I think at the time didn't think of it as real estate. I mean, it was not the way I thought of it. But I think as I started, to get into it and learn, really these casino resorts, in many ways are like some of the most complex pieces of real estate anywhere, right? They're just
Mm,
incredible in terms of, just the programming within these spaces, the operations, to run these. And so I I became interested in it, just when I understood it that way, that wow, these are places that are doing things at a very ambitious scale. Obviously, everyone's seen the scale in a place like Las Vegas, um, and it just incorporates so many different aspects of real estate there, right? You've got um, food service, retail, um, obviously the hotel side. You've got the casinos, you've got shows, you've got spa operations. It was fascinating. So for me, it was just, I was all of a sudden exposed to something that was, really blew my mind, I guess. Um, and I found it really interesting.
and that brings us to your second job, your second job in the real estate industry, which I think was more impactful and more revolutionary in terms of where you've landed today, and that was with the Irvine Company. And so, for those that don't know, for listeners that don't know, maybe give us a brief background about that company and where you ended up working within that
hmm
ecosystem.
hmm So the Irvine Company, for those who don't know, it's based in Southern California. It's headquartered in Newport Beach, and a lot of people don't know this, is the largest real estate company in the U.S. Uh, the chairman, the founder of the Irvine Company is Donald Bren, who is of anyone in the real estate industry has had the most success in the U.S. If you think about look at metrics like net worth and all that. But essentially, the Irvine Company, I mean, what Donald Bren did is took what is today Orange County, California. This was back when Orange County was Orange Groves, right? And had the vision to create a metropolitan area that would rival Los Angeles, right? And I think what was extraordinary about this vision was Donald Bren, early on realized that this was all driven by education, right? So what today is University of California at Irvine, that was one of the first things that the Irvine Company did is um, essentially, grant land to the University of California system and really use that to create an area that now today, I haven't seen the latest stats, but the GDP of that area is extraordinary, right? I mean, it's one of the most
Yeah.
prosperous places in the planet. And that 90 square miles, which Donald Bren controlled, became the core of the Irvine Company. And it was a giant master planning exercise. I mean, essentially, you're building cities there.
Right.
So all the pieces, residential, retail, office, higher education, school systems. Um, and so I ended up joining the Irvine Company. And was recruited there and ended up developing residential communities throughout California. And yeah, it was incredible. It's an incredible company, incredible platform. And, for me, it was certainly, very impactful.
Yeah. And there is a very, speaking of impactful, there was a very impactful story that you told me that I think is really fascinating, really cool in retrospect to think back to this moment. A moment that involved Donald Bren, a presentation, and a window, and I think you know what I'm talking about. So how did that actually play out in real time? What was that sort of that situation? And I know that has had a lasting impact on you. If you wouldn't mind telling the listeners about that story.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was a day I was in Donald Bren's office for a meeting, and we were having a conversation or a discussion, and I was one of many people in that room, but I, was relatively junior at the time, and there was something um, in the presentation I was asked to address, and so I did, and Donald Bren listens to me, and he kind of stops for a moment, and he says, "Arun," says, "look out that window. What do you see?" And so I look out the window, and from Donald Bren's office, you can see there, what's called Irvine Ranch, or Newport Coast is another term, but it's miles of beautiful coastline and cities of Newport Beach and Irvine and Costa Mesa, all of that from his office. And so I looked out the window and I said, "Well, I see the Irvine Ranch, Mr. Bren. I see the Newport Coast." And he turns to me. He goes, "No." He goes, "That's not what it is." He goes, he said, "That's my canvas."
Mm,
Um, and I remember that moment, because for me that was the first time, someone had articulated to me the power of these what we can do, um, and I think that's really what it is. Um, it can be very creative, and it's something we should all hopefully um, think about and try to achieve is that level uh,
mm.
with what we do.
And you mentioned to me that the time period with which this happened in was a moment where you felt like your perception of real estate really changed, and it sort of uh, there was a line in the sand between real estate as a transaction and real estate that can be more than that, that it can be something bigger than that, something more meaningful. And to pivot us a little bit towards Priya Living and what you're doing today, you went back to grad school, right, in the early 2000s. You had this idea of building master plan communities back in India. When we spoke about this, you mentioned that for you, it really checked a few different kinds of boxes. You could, going back to the transaction piece, and doing something bigger, you could help, your people, quote unquote. It would be something that'd be mission driven. You could build cities the way that you felt like they should be built, and so on, kind of pulling some of those lessons from what you took when you were looking out the window that day. But as the story goes, it's never a straight line, right? And you ended up starting a hospitality business. And then you eventually got a call from another colleague, and things started happening at that point. Can you kind of bring us up to speed with that next step in your journey with
Hmm.
the
Sure,
hotel and resort work?
sure. Yeah, I after my time at the Irvine Company, I ended up going back to grad school, and like you say, I went in with this idea that what I wanted to do eventually is, I'd obviously been influenced by the Irvine Company, and this concept of master planning communities was really uh, something I loved, and in the opportunities for doing that here in the U.S. are limited. I mean, we've built, they're still there, and people are still doing it, but we've obviously are much further along than other parts of the world. So I had this idea that India was building cities, and that's something I wanted to do. And um, but I, like you say, there's never a straight line, and I ended up, after I graduated, shortly thereafter, uh, starting a what ended up becoming a resort company. Um, and it happened by chance. I got a call out of the blue one day, like you said, from someone I had worked with who had um, come into control of 2,000 acres in Utah and had this idea. Hey, you know, what if we built a resort here? Um, so I thought it sounded really interesting. When I got that call, I ended up, you know, uh, I ended up joining on for that
Mm,
as one of the founders, and went on for several years. We ended up that building that project, which is called Amangiri, and I would say is in the conversation for um, one of the top resorts, certainly in the U.S. and
yeah.
potentially beyond. Um, and I spent a number of years developing and operating um, places like that in places like the French Alps, Costa Rica, Fiji, um, Napa Valley, and it was as great as it sounds, right? I mean, you're building
Mm,
beautiful places in beautiful, you're in beautiful settings, and truthfully, it was something I really enjoyed doing. Um, so, I think to bring it to Priya, I was doing all this, and at the same time coming home to visit my parents who were still living in that same house in Cerritos, and having these thoughts every time I would visit them about um, you know what what the future was going to look like, for them and for me.
right.
And you know I and that was, that was when I started, really down this path and to where we are today. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that sense of purpose seems like something that was the pivotal moment for you. You know, doing great work, um, building beautiful properties in beautiful places around the world. But what was the deep seated sense of purpose there? And it sounds like you were seeking that at the time. And I guess this was roughly 2010 when things changed a bit for you and you started Priya Living, what is known as Priya Living today. And I think what's really cool about this is something you told me is that it didn't really start as a company. You know, it wasn't really like this big, you know, master plan, no pun intended, you know, of Priya Living. It actually started as a duplex to help your parents and their close friends, which I think is another great story that leads into you know, the last decade or so of Priya. But yeah, it didn't start as what it is today, right? It started as just trying to help out your parents and making sure that they had a couple friends nearby.
yeah, like I say, I was, very happy doing what I was doing. But at the same time, I was troubled, by what was happening, what I felt very personally, and as I was thinking about my parents, and this really started in a place of I wanted my parents to be close by. I was living in the Bay Area. My parents were living in that same house in Cerritos, and I started that conversation with them. You know, love to have you guys closer. We went out when they would visit. We'd go tour senior living communities, and I think it was pretty clear to me just from the beginning. You could see that there just wasn't something out there
Mm,
that was a good fit, for them. It just nobody had nobody had done it right, and but for me at the time it wasn't. I didn't even see that, and I didn't think I wasn't. That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking, okay, I want my parents to move to the Bay Area. I live in San Francisco. Let me look for a duplex close to our place in San Francisco, and the idea of the duplex could have their best friends and a couple um, live. They could live together, and they'd have company. They'd have fun together. I'd be close by, and I thought, this is a perfect solution. I'm done. I
yeah,
mean, I've solved it.
that's it.
Um,
Yeah,
so that was where my mind was at.
and yet it was just the beginning, right? Because you started getting phone calls from people that you didn't numbers you didn't recognize, people you didn't necessarily know, and word got around, you know, more or less that there was this duplex and that there was, you know, your parents and their friends and this idea of creating community in retirement and later in life. You said you ended up getting a bunch of calls just sort of happenstance, and they started piling on, and people were saying to you, hey, we've been wanting to do this in our cities, in our neck of the woods for, you know, the last 20 years. Are you going to do this out here in Atlanta or out here in city X, Y, and Z? Um, were you expecting that at all, or was that sort of a moment where the script was flipped, so to speak, and you were like in awe of this new and interesting path that potentially was in front of you?
Yeah, look, I didn't expect any of it. I was looking, for a duplex, and I think the story that was shared, it was out there, became that there was someone out in the Bay Area that was creating a senior living community, um, inspired by Indian culture, right? And that became the story, and so that story got out there, and people started, they got my number, they called me, and that's when I had these conversations. I heard about this. You're building a senior living community, right? And at the time, you know, I didn't want to burst bubble, just say, no, it's just a duplex. And I was like, yeah, I guess you could,
Mm,
sure, yeah, I'm doing this for my parents and their friends. And, I ended up getting a number of these calls from people all over the country saying, they had heard about this. What a great idea. God bless you. And so that was really, yeah, that was the point where it just started to, I just started to think a little different. And, at the time I still had no clue because um, that was just the beginning. And then I ended up going out into the community for, probably close to 2 years, really talking to people, meeting with groups I didn't know existed of, like senior groups, right? That, hundreds of seniors that plan social events in places like the Bay Area and all over the U.S., right? And so I think it was all then. So that was the next step in the process for me, was going out and seeing that this was a lot
mm.
bigger, than I thought. Um, so
And
that
and
was, yeah.
yeah, and you were also saying that, there's this idea of the browning of the grain of America, and how, the elderly immigrant population are the fastest growing segment in the country, and where do they end up? Where are their homes later in life? And I think, when we look at the history of Priya Living, you started with 4 properties first in California. So we kind of jump from, the duplex years, so to speak, into the first 4 properties in California. Tell us about the driving factor in creating those first 4 communities, because I know a lot of the work that you do at Priya has to do with making that phase of life fun and exciting and inspirational. And I want the listeners to sort of hear that piece of the story too, because I think it's really important.
Hmm. I think we think about placemaking, right? I mean, really, I prefer that as a way of thinking. I think real estate doesn't capture, what is possible. And, for me, what's interesting, and I think a lot of, what I've learned in what I've done from other people who have done this, is how to create spaces and places that captivate, that capture your imagination, that take you on a journey, that help you think differently about the world, right? And I think that's the way we approach what we do. And we take a lot of care in that. I mean,
Mm,
that is hard work. It's not, it's not something that just happens, um, but that's the way we think about what we do. And, our, um, that's, and ultimately, that's that's, I think, what we're, um, uh, what people feel,
mm,
right? I mean, that's when
right.
people come into the communities, right? You feel that this place is special. Um, so
And
that's,
not to cut
mhm,
you off, or to steal a
sure.
quote, but I'm going to steal a quote that you told me, because I love
Hmm.
it. And you told me, really what it comes down to is that we are building a stage
Hmm.
for the residents so they can perform their own show. And I thought that was just, of all the things that you hear about, developments going up across the country, I loved that, because it's takes the focus away from the developer, and it puts the focus back on, why are we doing this? Who are we developing this for? And what's the intent here? And I loved the stage analogy that you came up with.
Hmm. Right. Well, look, we do believe very strongly that really communities. I mean, it's really all about the people, right? And the what makes special communities is the relationships that people in the community have with one another, right? And so you know we do think it is the spotlight is on the people in our community. It is a stage. It's their stage. Um, we want every member of the community to feel like they're the star in their own Broadway or Bollywood production, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you feel when you walk out the front door. Um, and so, yeah, our buildings are sets, right? They're sets,
Mm.
but you know, you don't go to the you don't go to the Broadway production for the set. I mean, sure, a great set, it's great, right? But
Yep.
you go for the actors, the actresses, you go for all of that, um, and that's how we view it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's our view.
And
Yeah.
not to discredit the sets though. Let's be fair. The If you haven't seen the Priya Living sets, they're beautiful. We'll share some links at the end of the podcast. But truly, I mean, you can tell just by looking at the photos and renderings of the upcoming projects that you have in the works. The set does matter, and you're creating
Sure.
this stage for the resident in a way that really hasn't been done before. At least I've never seen it done before this way. And I think that transitions us into this last segment before we start to wrap up, which is to say, there's been some stigma around the terminology or the multiple different types of terminologies that reside around this idea of senior living, retirement communities, nursing homes, whatever different stigmas, and some of them are similar that are attached to those phrases. It matters. And I think one of the things that you're trying to do with Priya Living as well is to emphasize language. That's been a very strong point of focus for Priya Living. What is it about the language that matters so much, and why is that so important for you and the mission of Priya Living?
Well, look, obviously, I mean, words matter, right? I mean, words matter. They impact how we think and feel about things. But look, words are just one tool. But yeah, look, I think there's no doubt that when people hear the term senior living, um, their association with that, it's not. It may not be great because their experience with senior living wasn't great, right? And but I think for us, the reason we're so focused on this goes a bit beyond that, because I think what what we realized as we got into this is this isn't even about seniors, right? This is about how do we, all of us, how do we want to live, right? And um, we've created quote unquote senior communities that have attracted young people, right? And we we've had non-seniors living in our communities that have loved it. And we I think a lot of that is, we do think about, how do we want to live, how do I want to live, um and I think there's something universal there, that's we want, I think we all we want relationships, with our neighbors. We want, um we want to feel connected, right? Um and what too much real estate development does is create places where people aren't connecting,
Right.
right? I mean, the nameless multifamily project that people get in an elevator and, you know, they've gotten on the same elevator 20 times with that person and don't know their name,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
And we've all, we've all experienced it. We've all lived in situations like that. Um, but I think it's breaking through that is important. And so we think this transcends, senior living. It's about, you know, it's about human connection. But yes, we have a mission here. We are very much focused on elder needs. But
Yeah.
we're all you know we're all soon to be elders, right? And
Exactly.
um,
We're all on our way, right?
we're all on that. We're all on the way, and I think that's important. To keep in mind, we're all going to be elders.
Yeah.
So or are, right? So um, yeah.
Well, let's talk about Priya 3.0. If Priya 1.0 was the duplex and 2.0 was the first four communities in California, tell the listeners about 3.0, quote unquote, and the new developments happening right now and some of your plans for expansion. What's next with Priya Living?
hmm Well, we're expanding nationally, and certainly also are planning international expansion as well. But right now we're focused on like the major markets, major cities in the U.S. primarily, and this next generation. Um, Obviously, with every generation, you have the opportunity to make things better. Um, and what we're excited about is there's a lot of new um, uh, features, I guess you could say, in these communities that we haven't done before. And I actually don't think anyone has done before. We've got um, one one feature I'm really excited about, which is called the incubator. Um, which is essentially it's a co-working space, but it serves a purpose for helping our our uh, our residents find their purpose, right? And
Mm,
whether it's starting new ventures, whether it's writing a book, um, there's just so many ways that happens. But and we've developed and are developing programming around that as well. But I think there's a bigger conversation certainly here in the U.S. we need to have about elders and how we re-engage them. Because that's going to be really important. So that's one piece. But we've got a number of really cool. I could go on and on other things we're doing in this next generation, from the food side. We've got some very innovative, um, uh, food concepts, to the wellness side. Um, we are using. I think we're going to be the first to have virtual reality studios that are used for mental wellness. Um, so there's some of this obviously it's fun to do because there's always that process of creating new things using new technologies.
yeah.
Um, so
And I love how
that's just cool things. Yeah. Good.
I love
Good.
how iterative Priya Living is. I mean, when we think about the story just in the last 10 years of where you've come from, you can tell that you focus on iterations, seeing what works, applying it to the next one, dropping what doesn't work, and so on and so forth. And so when we're thinking about these new locations, wellness matters, the food matters. The incubator is a really unique concept for seniors. I think that's going to be really exciting to see come to life. So I'm excited for you and Priya as you start to, or as I should say, as you continue to innovate and then start to see how some of these new ideas roll out. I want to make sure we have enough time for this because I really like the rapid fire section, as I'm going to call it here today. Couple quick questions for you. Let me ask the first one and get your take. What is one book that you would recommend right now to the listeners, and why?
I would, I'd say Nomadland, which is a book. The author is Jessica Bruder. Now, I think many people have heard about this because it was also a movie based on this book
Right.
that I think it may have won. I think it did win Best Picture. And I have to admit, I did first see it as a movie and then read the book. But very fascinating. I think it's really an important um, really important work. I think for those who don't know, it's about it really focuses on one woman's story, but it's about these communities throughout the U.S. Um, and this phenomenon happening now of people living on the road as nomads, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's it's really a big it's happening in big numbers. And
Yeah.
for me, it was very interesting on a number of levels just to learn about it. But a lot of these people happen to be seniors or elders, right? And so, um, I mean, just from what we do, just kind of thinking about what people out there need. Um, for me, that's really interesting. Is just to
Mm.
learn about it, and who knows, maybe there's something we can do about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you bring that up because I think a lot of times these concepts feel very like we go about our daily lives, and sometimes these sort of concepts and these movements can feel very foreign to us because we're not in the movements ourselves. You know what I mean? And an interesting thing that happened to me and my family over the kind of that lockdown period with COVID was, unfortunately, our neighbor passed away. He was sort of the head of the household over there, and he passed away during that time. And his wife actually has since gotten a camper. She has left, and she's rarely been back at the house. And she actually just came back in the last week, and she had been gone for probably 9 to 12 months, and she's doing that same thing. She's going out there, she's trying to sort of figure out what's next, and for her, what's next
Sure.
isn't this house that she lived in for so many years. And so that's going to be a very interesting thing to see play out with the senior community, certainly, but then the next generation, and
The
what's
broader,
that going to look
sure,
like.
sure.
Yeah.
No, millennials as well. I mean, we've all heard about van life, and
Yep.
I think a part of it is getting back to what we do, and from a real estate standpoint, it's challenging kind of how we think about real estate, even, and that people, and so to me, that's also super interesting, right? It's like you know
Mm.
we're thinking about houses or buildings that have apartments or condos, and people out there are thinking very differently. And it's just having, yeah, just being flexible in how we think,
Right.
is the way
Yeah.
is what's interesting to me.
In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have put that in the rapid fire section. that
Sorry,
that's a good no, that was a
I
good
made
sidebar.
rapid not so rapid.
Yeah, but this next one I really love because it always gives someone the opportunity to quickly Google the work of this person. But the next question is, who else do you feel like is really doing exciting work out there? Who should the listeners be paying attention to that they can go take a look at?
My pick here, it'd be a group. I'm not sure how many people know about them, but they're called Grupo Habita, Habita. It's Grupo, Grupo. It's a company they're based in Mexico City. I've been following their work for a long time, and this goes back to my time in hospitality. But just really very, very creative in how they think about space, and create spaces that have impact, that inspire people. Uh, they've
Yeah.
done a lot of very cool, like adaptive reuse at a level that, taking these like 16th century churches and reimagining them, and it's a group. Yeah, they have come into the U.S. now, but yeah, I'm just a big fan, and I I I draw my inspiration from everywhere. So
That's great.
that's one I put out there.
Yeah, yeah, and for the listeners, we have a nice show notes section that we will be sure to include all these links in. So if you're curious about something that came up on the podcast today, go ahead and check out the show notes. Everything from all the Priya Living links to some of the things that have been mentioned on the podcast. But let me pause there and say, Arun, you did it. You made it to the very end. There's only one more thing to do here, and that is to roll out the obligatory red carpet and tell the listeners what you're up to and where they can find you online to do a little bit more follow up.
Well, the best spot's our website, so www.priyaliving.com.
Awesome. And then I'll also include Arun on LinkedIn if you want to link up with him and share your next great idea. I'm sure he'd be interested in hearing that. Arun, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really been a pleasure.
This is a lot of fun, Chris. Appreciate you having me on.